Welcome to Windows on the World, and we've got a great show for you tonight. I've got a lot to get through as well, such a lot happening. I've called this show End Times because it could be the end times for many things, and the amount of information that we've put out this year is quite amazing when I look back at all the shows we've done. But there is one common thread, and the common thread is the link between all the shows, and most of the stuff that we broadcast is all about the controlling of the narrative. So we're going to cover that in some depth tonight, and we're going to talk about social media meltdown, as Facebook is the least trusted social media website. Soros gets awarded the Financial Times Award for his subversion business. Now, we've covered all of the ideological subversion that's been going on over the past year in our accumulation of shows, which is now pretty vast. So we're also going to cover the drone over Gatwick story, and it could be contrived, this story, to bring in new legislation allowing offensive laser weapon technology to be used in public spaces. That's something I've been looking into today. So all of this will tie into tonight's show, which we're going to get into very, very soon. I'm just getting relaxed here, and Tony Hurst is with me, and I suppose this is our Christmas show. So before we carry on, maybe Tony would like to say hello to the listener. So Tony, have you got a word for the listener?
I'd just like to say evening all and happy every day. I don't see why we should only have 1 or 2 days to be happy in our lives. So happy every day for the rest of your long happy lives.
Well, this is it, and I was looking at Twitter today, and the virtue signalling has started in earnest, with Ellie Gould saying on Twitter that everyone should say hello, be nice, and give some money to a homeless person. Isn't it strange the way that comes out a couple of days before Christmas? However, yes, this is a recent quote from an alleged yellow vest protester on Russia Today's Sputnik. Get a load of this one. One yellow vest protester tells of their want to reclaim Great Britain. As told to Sputnik, Britain's political class could see a revolution like they've never seen before. Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? But I don't think it's going to go against what we're talking about tonight, because we've been talking about this for quite some time, the way the state has been preparing for so-called civil unrest. And this latest story about the drone does tie into that. It carries on with a quote. This is on Sputnik, allegedly from a yellow vest. "We don't want to be part of the federal European superstate that's going to erode our rights and take away our sovereignty." Well, all this is great, and let's see what happens. The protests in France have been very interesting. We've now got chemical weapons being used against the French, and the threat of ultra-strong and even deadly chemical weapons to be used, and the amount of tear gas that was about on the latest protest would indicate that that's already happening. So let's see how things go. Now, it says in this article on Sputnik, there are ways to combat the media and even government-controlled opposition, and we've spent the last several years covering that in great detail. So yes, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here. Let's see what happens. So the use of the likes of Twitter and Facebook as surveillance systems for entrapment and charging people with hate speak is legendary, and even participants in this show have had their comments trawled. The sheer creepiness of Facebook and also Twitter should put most sensible people off it, and it now looks as though it actually has, and we're going to be looking into that a bit later in the show. We're also going to be looking at the World Jewish Congress addressing UNESCO. That's really interesting. UNESCO's Director General Audrey Azoulay states we must fight against moral regression. Now, if only that were the case, but in the shutting down of all free speech on the back of disputed narratives, in the words of UNESCO and the UN, No one will be left behind, meaning no one will be allowed to express any opinion outside the brave new world and 1984 narrative of 2 and 2 equals 5. I'm just going to read out a tweet from Alexandra Nekrasov at Stirring Trouble on Twitter. That's at Stirring Trouble on Twitter. Do follow him if you're not following already. He has great insights into what's going on. I'm just going to read his tweet out. 2018 has confirmed that the EU remains the biggest threat to Europe's stability, and that the prospect of a big war on the continent is growing because of Brussels meddling in the affairs of member countries and antagonising them against each other with its idiotic policies. Now, this is where Soros comes in, George Soros, who's been fomenting these sort of agitation groups and the obviously going along with the UN Migration Compact, which we're all meant to sign up to. And of course, all of this is causing dissent amongst the European neighbours. So in other words, the EU is actually about the fragmentation and destruction of the cooperation between countries under this federal superstate. And this is incredibly difficult to get across to Remainers, but I suppose we might as well keep trying in the face of the post-truth world and the post-truth narratives that they believe, they live, those that are part of the narrow corridor of accepted opinion. I think that should be our phrase for the year, actually. The narrow corridor of accepted opinion, which is getting narrower all the time. Now, before we get into the real meat and potatoes of the show, this is from the World Economic Forum website. Britain is to ban advertising showing women who can't park or men who struggle to change a nappy in a crackdown on gender stereotypes, the industry watchdog said on Friday. The Advertising Standards Authority said a review had found some stereotypes were harmful, citing ads that belittle men for carrying out tasks seen as female, or suggesting new mothers should prioritise looking good over emotional well-being. This is a quote from them. Right. This is on the World Economic Forum website. Our new rule calls time on stereotypes that hold back people and society, said Shirahia Kupal, director of the Committees of Advertising Practice, which sets the advertising standards applied by the ASA. So from next June, adverts featuring a depiction of gender roles that could cause offence or harm will be axed, it said. The ban will apply to broadcast and non-broadcast media, including TV, radio, newspapers and social media. It follows a campaign for weight loss products featuring a bikini-clad model with a tagline, "Are you beach body ready?" And it drew a barrage of complaints. Could that be because the nation sits in front of television screens eating crap? Maybe that's what it is, and maybe the advertisers are to blame for that as well. So in November, retailer Marks and Spencer came under fire for a window display juxtaposing men in suits and women in knickers, while 2 months earlier, Sweden's advertising watchdog said a viral meme showing a man staring at another woman was sexist. Okay, so we know we are in the post-truth world, and everything real is now unreal, and everything unreal has now to be real. It carries on. Harmful gender stereotypes in ads contribute to how people see themselves, said Ella Smiley, CAP's gender stereotyping project lead. Oh, wait a minute. So this is her job title, Gender Stereotyping Project Lead. And we're just informed by the Daily Mail today that we could get a transgender James Bond. So that's another interesting one for our listener to contemplate. But as we haven't time here, we're going to move swiftly on. It carries on with this though. It says they can hold some people back from fulfilling their potential, right? This is the gender stereotyping project lead. So they can hold some people back from fulfilling their potential or from aspiring to certain jobs and industries, bringing costs for individuals and the economy. Women's rights group welcomed the move, which follows a public consultation by the watchdog. Did anyone hear about this? Because I didn't. Our society and our economy pays a heavy price for the constraints we place on boys and girls from our earliest moments in life. It has to change, said Sam Smethers, Chief Executive of the Fawcett Society. I'm sure they're bastions of truth and upholders of human dignity. Some suggested the new rule went too far. Well, I wonder who they were. They were the sort of extremists. Maybe they were the sort of extremists who listened to Windows on the World, who are now the new centre. So the people who were extremists are now in the centre of all ideology, and they are the quiet voice of reason, which of course is never going to be ever heard again in the end times, which I think is the title to tonight's show. So some suggested the new rule went too far. What next? The politically correct going for our comedy shows, tweeted Andrea Jenkins, a lawmaker with the ruling Conservatives, the right-wing party. This is obviously in America. However, Britain's main industry body supported the ban. Our most recent research on public trust has shown the public particularly appreciates advertising when it takes a progressive stance. Well, I don't know anybody who appreciates advertising that takes a progressive stance, but maybe I'm mixing with the wrong people. Maybe I'm mixing with ultra-radicals. You know, those people that MI5 tell us are dangerous and are the new threat. People who maybe don't want to be part of the European Stasi. Oops. Yeah, that's a bit controversial. So, yeah, that's incredibly interesting, really, isn't it? So, when you look at what passes for comedy now, I mean, this is going back to the demonic Facebook, you know. They have adverts from the BBC about their latest comedians and also what's meant to be satire. And somebody put on there, after a barrage of abuse basically from people saying this is not funny, saying, oh, well, I guess you don't understand sarcasm. Now, sarcasm is the lowest form of wit, but there wasn't any form of wit being used on the page. So that also kind of backfired on the person who wrote that. But looking at all this so-called comedy that the BBC are putting out, it's absolutely atrocious. I wonder if anyone in chat has got anything to say about that, because I don't know the names of any of these comedians. I see them occasionally on television. But is there anyone in chat, Tony? Well, there are people in chat, obviously, but can they hear us? Oh, it's all right. We are broadcasting, that's okay. Because Windows Towers is up against it. Every week we fight tooth and nail to get the show on air. And yes, it is a bit like They Live. We are breaking through, and even people in the mainstream are now catching parts of our broadcasts. Now, I don't want to go on too much about this next story. It's about Gilad Atzmon, the sax player, and in a way a philosopher and writer. He is a philosopher, and he's actually brought up some great things about especially Jewish identity politics, and we've had him on the show. We've done quite a long interview with Gilad, which you can find there, when we talk all about this in great depth. And of course, Gilad was an Israeli citizen, and he's now a UK citizen, Israeli-born writer and sax player. So Gilad, the sax player, was lauded and fawned over by the press until he started to put out his philosophical ideas on Jewish identity politics. And in the wake of all that, this last week, Islington Assembly Hall banned Gilad from performing with his band, the Blockheads. Now, the Blockheads, of course, featured Ian Dury. Their classic album, New Boots and Panties, was released, I believe, in 1977. And the band have been going strong ever since. And so their gig at Islington Assembly Hall was affected by somebody called Martin Rankoff, who bought a ticket for the gig and then stated he couldn't attend because Gilad was playing. Now, this is all over the internet. You can read all about it, so we're not going to get into all the details. But the fact is that this guy who actually made the complaint works for Likud Harat Limited, which is a political lobbying organisation for the Likud party, and there could be possibly a political motivation behind this. But it's rumoured that Gilad Atzmon, the sax player who was banned from his own gig by Islington Council, which is actually unlawful, even citing the legislation that they were using. It is rumoured that the sax player turned up as Santa. So I have a nice story which goes along with that from the Jewish Telegraph Agency. And the title is Santa Claus is an Orthodox Jew. So, in other words, by turning up as Santa Claus, Gilad has actually done a great job for community relations. So listen to what Rick Rosenthal had to say. He's the Santa Claus who is an Orthodox Jew. It says from the Jewish Telegraph Agency, a full-time professional Santa sees no contradiction between serving as the symbol of Christmas and living as an observant Jew. To him, Santa is a non-religious spiritual figure who provides trust, reassurance and comfort to the young and old. He says that anyone who is inclined to criticise him for working as a Santa should consider ways they help non-Jews observe holidays, like working a shift on Christmas when Christians take the day off, he says. As a Jew, we are able to be a light unto the world, Rosenthal said, paraphrasing a famous Jewish aphorism from the Bible. That's one of our jobs. If we can help people's lives better, we should do that. If we can help make their lives better, it's a mitzvah. We can ease tension between Jews and non-Jews. We can do that. So Gilad Atzmon, dressed as Santa, is part of a great tradition and one that could bring together Jews and Christians at Christmas. But with the lobbyists and UK fake news neurotics in charge, do not hold your breath. So that's kind of an interesting story, an interesting angle on that story, which I don't think anyone else has put out yet, because I think that's just a recent article that came out. So let's hope that Mr. Rankov of Likud Harat UK, who made the complaint, did not do it as a politically motivated act to further the agenda of a nation state created in 1948 and in breach of international law, and for the suppression of any criticism of Israel, especially by one of its own born and bred citizens. That's Mr. Atzmon. So being Semitic and anti-Semitic at the same time, isn't that what they call cognitive dissonance?
It would be one, yeah. An anti-Semitic Semite, yeah.
Well, it's one to think about, isn't it? So, yeah, I mean, Gilad's written all about this on his website, but also he goes on to have a little go at Hope Not Hate, who've been following him around and basically slandering him for years, along with many other people. He says the anti-fascist campaign group Hope Not Hate considers him to be an anti-Semite who has promoted the work of Holocaust deniers. Now, he's never actually done that. And this is the way slander works. What tends to happen, and I've seen the way this works on social media, because once people get hold of a rumour, they repeat it as the truth. And I saw this in relation to what Gilad was saying. And as a response, when people said it's not fair, other people were posting posts from the ADL about Gilad Atzmon. Well, the ADL is a lobbying group, and basically they go around defaming people who they don't like, who are a problem. Well, as I say, it's all very ironic with Gilad being an Israeli, and actually he is a real Semite, and the people who are actually attacking him are not really Semitic because they're not born in the Middle East. So the whole thing's kind of ironic, and it is the post-truth world, so I suppose we should move on. But Hope Not Hate is an extension of MI5. We keep reporting that, and sings from the same press releases as GCHQ. So we have to look at the subversion plan as a whole, and that's why we call it the bigger picture, especially the rise of the non-existent but ever-present in the news far right, or those uncontaminated by ideological subversion, which would probably be our listeners. So, yeah. But in turn, Gilad has accused the group Hope Not Hate of being an integral part of the Zionist network dedicated to promoting Jewish tribal politics. I think that they're using that as a quote. But the other thing about this is they often use quotes which aren't accurate and often, in a way, aren't true. But this is interesting as a little coda to that. This is a quote from the Likud Harat UK page, of which Martin Rankov is an agent of. It says on there, as our own little gesture, we'd like to pay tribute to the incredible Nikki Haley, who together with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Israel at the UN Ambassador Danny Danon took on and shamed the hateful bigots at the United Nations after year upon year of trumped-up resolutions against Israel. Thank you, Nikki Haley. There has to be a sense of irony going on there for anyone to even comprehend that as an honest quote. That's my opinion. Now, let's get on to more trivial matters, okay? The Gatwick drone story, which has dominated the headlines and disrupted holiday traffic. And Transport Secretary Chris Grayling was under intense pressure over his handling of the crisis amid claims the security services had to intervene to get a grip on the situation. Now, this is where I've been doing a bit of research today, and people may find this part of the show especially interesting. So, the solution to this probably manufactured situation is this first major news item. So the apparent culprits were an ex-soldier and his wife, and they've been basically slandered by the Daily Mail, and they're being sort of put up as people who've ruined Christmas. And ever since that story was released, which was only a few hours ago, it's been countered by all other forms of media, and they have been released absolutely without charge. And Detective Chief Superintendent Tingley, who's in charge of all this, said the arrested man and woman had fully cooperated with inquiries after information was received from a member of the public. So basically some busybody has seen them putting this drone in the back of their car and shot them by the sound of it. Isn't Crime Stoppers great? We can get onto that because that is also part of the story. Wait for that bit. But talking about the disclosure of their personal details in the press, he said he was satisfied their arrest was lawful. Well, all arrests are lawful. It's whether they're actually, in a way, of any consequence. Anyone could be arrested and then they de-arrest you. So it's a stupid thing to say. All arrests are lawful, aren't they? Because they can always de-arrest you afterwards and let you go. Basically, authorities finally regained control over the airfield earlier on Friday after the army deployed unidentified military technology. Really? Well, that's interesting, isn't it? It is believed that the Israeli-developed drone dome system, which can jam communications between the drone and its operator, was used. Now, this is very interesting, and you'll get to hear why in a minute. Let me just carry on here. However, experts have said it does not enable the person responsible to be tracked down and captured. Well, it wouldn't really, would it? I mean, if you're going to have technology that can identify a drone, it's not going to necessarily identify the person. However, when we get on to what sort of technology is at the back of this, you may form a different opinion. John Murray, Professor of Robotics and Autonomous Systems at the University of Hull, said it could only take the drone out of the sky. Well, yeah, that's just what they've said. So that's basically what the mainstream media have said about it. So let's go a bit deeper. I'm going to ask a question. So was this a joint effort by the MOD and its business partners, Rafael, who are the manufacturers of this new technology to identify and take out drones? So the Israeli drone interception technology purchased by the UK, it was a £20 million deal done in August this year, 2018. So what is behind this story? There's many reasons why this shouldn't have happened, and more likely an agenda for tightened security and or laying the blame for political purposes. But most importantly, get this, Rafael, Israel's guardian angel, sold to the British military. And we could go into a bit of the history of Raphael there, but I don't think we've got time. But Raphael disguises himself as a human and keeps the younger Tobias safe on a journey, chases away a demon and heals the elder Tobias of his blindness. Because of these actions, Raphael is considered, especially by Catholics, as the patron of the blind, of travellers and of physicians. So it's a very good thing, and it's named after somebody who was great. That's this drone technology. So basically, this is a story which came out in 2018, and it was from August, and it was the original story of Rafael to sell 6 anti-drone systems to the UK for $20 million, actually. So they're selling them to the UK for $20 million. The anti-drone system Rafael. The UK Ministry of Defence is Rafael's first customer for the system. The British Army will be the first customer for Rafael Advanced Defence System Limited's drone dome system. The system will be used to protect sensitive facilities and sites on which British forces are deployed from drones. Several of the systems will be purchased in the coming months. So, has this technology been, way before the Wayward drone shut down the airport? Basically, we're talking about August this year. So this technology has been in effect and possible use since then. So it says Rafael, which has been displaying the capabilities it has developed in neutralising and intercepting drones, won a tender published by the UK Ministry of Defence in competition with Israel Aerospace Limited. Well, there's not much competition going on there then, is it, if they were the only two competitors and they're both from Israel? So under the contract, it says here, under the contract with the UK Ministry of Defence, which is believed to be worth 20 million, Rafael will supply 6 drone interception systems during a 6-month period. So that's well underway. So basically, we're talking about really high-level technology here. Now, the version to be sold to the UK, it says, lacks the laser beam interception option because the UK demanded that it deployed quickly and the need to comply with regulation governing the use of lasers. So basically, the use of the technology that's within this system wasn't lawful when it was rolled out. So the government is saying they're not using the full system. Now, that may be the reason for the drone drama, an excuse for legislation being put into place to use this laser intercept technology on civilian targets, all with the help of the Israelis. Very, very interesting, that, isn't it? So the main points from the media on this issue were that it emerged that the 3-day fiasco could have been averted in a matter of hours, but offers of help from RAF and Army electronic experts were rejected. Now, this could result in new legislation to make the use of laser weapons in civilian areas legal. Does this tie in to the forthcoming predicted civil unrest? In other words, using laser weapons against the public in public areas, or to take down drones in public areas, and even targeting the people who are actually flying drones. This is getting more and more, I think, to the point where it starts to make some sense, because the whole of this drone story doesn't make any sense at all. Gatwick security chiefs knew of the threat posed by drones, but sought only to enlist the help of neighbourhood watch groups and put up signs warning operators to stay away. Well, you couldn't really make up how stupid that is, could you? How many neighbourhood watch groups are around Gatwick Airport? I mean, you're talking about a massive site there, aren't you? I think Tony should join us actually to talk about this, because Tony's actually a drone pilot himself. Unless you don't want that to be put out, Tony, but it is public now. But
bit late for that, isn't it?
It is a bit, but
bit late for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I find the whole thing a bit disturbing. I don't know whether anyone's actually come up with any footage of this so-called drone yet, but the amount of time that it was supposedly in the air kind of defies any belief that I've got in the ability of a drone to stay up in the air for that amount of time. If it's a big one, like they're saying, then landing that to change the batteries or the fuel, whatever way it might be fueled, would be a bit of an issue without it getting seen or heard. There's quite a few anomalies there, and many of the more marketable, the biggest drones in the market are DJI drones, the Phantom series and the Maverick series. Their software comes with restrictions for anywhere that's restricted military space, airports and all that. It will actually stop your drone going into that space, but you could use other software, or you could hack or override that in some way, I'm sure. But there seems to be many anomalies to do with it, and I'm pretty sure there is a distraction for some reason, and in the not too distant future we're going to find out exactly what it's all about.
Yeah, it carries on here. Although airports can use radar scanners and cameras to look for drones, they cannot easily use jammers to stop them flying. Well, I suppose they can now. It's all going to be brought in. But it just ties in with this story of this new drone technology far too tightly for it to be a coincidence, in my opinion. Police are still exploring the theory, it says here, that eco-warriors or activists protesting against deportation of migrants could be behind the mayhem. Well, this was another angle, wasn't it? But when you realise what has been just sort of said on the show about this company getting this contract, then it makes sense that the whole thing would be instigated by our own intelligence services. Well, we use the word intelligence a bit loosely when we're talking about them. So the link with so-called activist groups can also be used. Now, the result is more powers by the state and legal use of currently unlawful technology against civilian targets as supplied by this Israeli company, Raphael. So there you go, the story in a nutshell. New legislation for the use of the laser technology against the public, especially as during the planned civil unrest, drones may well be used by groups who organised enough. Now, so is there anything you'd like to add on that story, Tony?
Yeah, well, I've no doubt that there are a lot of regulations coming for drones, and most of them I don't disagree with. Maybe even all of them, because as usual, irresponsible idiots destroy things for many decent people that are out there. I mean, many photographers and that are doing well with drones, they're getting a lot out of it. But getting back to the signal jammers, as I was explaining to you earlier, if I go along this Thames here towards Foulness Island, which is a military installation, they do underground weapons testing there, secret apparently. You can't take a camera on the island or near it on the days of the year that it is open to the public, normally for charitable events. But my point is, I've flown my drone doing sunrise footage, both sides of that island, one side on Wallasey Island and the other side at Shoeburyness. And the closer it gets to the boom, the more, the less control I have over the drone. And when the software's active, it does actually warn you that you're flying into an airspace where you're likely to lose control of your drone. So the point being is that that installation is protected from me flying over it by some kind of frequency that it's dishing out, some kind of jammer or a something that does the compassing inside the drone. So that technology is already there and has been there for years. They are actually using it, so I'm not sure what all of this is about, and if they can do that over Foulness Island where very little people go, why that's not being employed over airports or at airports.
You often find this with these stories, though. There's an element of clumsiness in the whole thing, and there's huge holes into why it should or shouldn't have happened. That's the thing about it. It doesn't really make sense. And then you've got this ex-soldier being blamed for it there publicly. I mean, basically being slandered by the Daily Mail. Are these the people who ruined Christmas? And within hours, no newsflash, they weren't. They had nothing to do with it. But then again, there's an MOD connection. The whole thing is what we've come to expect from the media, though, isn't it? Because you don't really get a straight answer. And the usual civil service answer, as denoted by civil servants and actually related on this show, is that a typical answer from the Ministry of Defence is, well, yes and no.
Yeah. Any way you want it.
That's right.
As long as you vote for me.
Yeah. Well, it's that this planned civil unrest that's coming, I think, has been planned for years. I think it's been manufactured. But what's interesting about it is whether it's controlled in the way the state wants it to be controlled. Now, obviously, it's interesting with the yellow vest thing, because that did seem to start organically, because the people who originally turned up were from rural France. And they had really good points about what they were protesting about. It was about fuel prices. A nice, easy thing. It has one aim, and then obviously other aims come out and the thing gets taken over. A bit like Occupy and all the rest of it. And a bit like what's happening with this Extinction Rebellion, which we've covered over the last few weeks. And we're getting a lot more insight into that. And the whole of this stuff is about psychological subversion when it comes down to it. And once you know the template of how they do it, you start seeing these things everywhere. And then, of course, you'd be called a conspiracy theorist by the mainstream. And we were talking about that earlier on. It's a really interesting thing that obviously conspiracy theorists were people who were talking about the assassination of Kennedy. And they were talking outside the official narrative. Well, we all know where that went. And, of course, that was after the Warren Commission that we won't tolerate these conspiracy theories. Same with George Bush. He used it again after 9/11. So the whole point about this narrow language and the way it's presented, and the use of these terms which are slanderous basically, to shut down people, is that they're extremely limited within themselves. So you're talking about a very simplistic system here. You know, how many times can you use these terms like conspiracy theorist, neo-Nazi, etc., you know, and labelling everyone far right who's got a brain cell left, who's not extreme left. And we've talked about this endlessly on the show, so I don't really want to go on about it. But, I mean, I think over the past year we've done some really good work on this, especially with the actual template for how it all works. And these organisations such as Hope Not Hate, we've covered how small charities are being attacked as well. And then, of course, Hope Not Hate's a charity. You get these charities that are attacking other people. And then, conversely, small charities and organisations are getting attacked by the state. And we've covered all that this year, and especially the psychological stuff and the way all this works, because I think that in a way that's a bit of a speciality of what we've been doing over the past several years, and that was before we even started doing Windows on the World, was looking into this stuff. I find it very fascinating. Once you get this template of how the state works, and basically you're talking about people who aren't very bright, who are employed as administrators, and of course the idea of a priest class is that you use administrators to do your work for you. And when the administrators are only as good as the intelligence that's going in, and the intelligence is not that good in my opinion. But the mapping and lockdown of cities, this is interesting because this started happening many years ago. And there were helicopters up over London in the middle of the night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, all over London, mapping it out. And of course, with the Smart Cities agenda and the Agenda 2030 stuff, which is all about closing off roads and keeping people in very small areas in surveilled, gated communities and in these hive housing areas, which they're building everywhere. This is actually lockdown. You don't need martial law if you've got that kind of lockdown. And this is what I see going on, really. And all of these sort of stories that we get fed, and this thing about the drone, they're all part of that. I predict that there will be legislation introduced, probably on the back of another distraction story. A distraction story will appear, and this will appear in small print, and it will be another takedown of freedom and another infringement and attack on rights, basically. So that's really the sort of outcome that's the only one I can predict from this. But yeah, it's a shame about the tightening up of drones, because I was hoping to get some really good aerial photographs for some of my documentaries, but we're going to be targeted now by Raphael, you know.
Ooh.
I mean, yeah, this
That's what you get for being an anti-denier.
Well, this is right. I'm a denier. I deny being a denier.
I'm anti that.
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it? But population in high-density housing with no cars and no way out except by rail or public transport, they're all part of this. And this is what this HS2 thing, this is the whole of what's happening in London and all the cities is about. Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, all these places are going to be ultra-surveilled, and this is what we've been covering. And the whole of it ties into the climate change agenda, as we know. But I don't think we can do much more on the drone story, but social media mistrust amongst the public. Now, this is really interesting. Out of the major tech companies, people trust Facebook the least with their personal information. Well, it's not really surprising after what's happened, is it? I mean, how could you? You know, how could you trust them within your personal...
It's good to know they've heard some of it.
That's right. Amazon and Twitter come in a distant second and third, with 8% of people saying they trust these companies the least with their personal information. Statistas, right? This is the organisation that carried out this survey. Sarah Feldman shows below. Now, this is interesting, actually. I've got this graph here. 5 times more people place Facebook as the least trustworthy company to handle their personal information when compared to Amazon and Twitter. So Facebook has been giving some of the world's largest technology companies, more than 150 of these companies, far more intrusive access to users' personal data than it has ever disclosed, according to an investigation by the New York Times. Up to 400 million people's private information was freely shared with the likes of Google, Microsoft, Netflix, Spotify and other partners, and they didn't sell it, they gave it away. Everyone's information was given away for free throughout the tech community in order to foster industry relations and advance their own interests. So it says here, both Netflix and Spotify claimed they had no idea they had such broad capabilities, while a Royal Bank of Canada spokesman denied that the bank had any such access. Amazon was granted access to users' names and contact information through their friends, while Yahoo was able to view streams of friends' posts as recently as this summer, despite Facebook promising it had stopped this type of sharing years earlier. So what's more, China and Huawei and Russian search giant Yandex accused last year by the Ukraine of funneling user data to the Kremlin, it says here, had access to Facebook's unique user IDs. But there's a graph here, and it says Facebook loses the public's trust. So 40% of the public don't trust Facebook. Well, that's pretty low, really, isn't it? I mean, that's ridiculously low when you think about it.
Yeah, it should be at least 90%, shouldn't it?
I thought so. Twitter's only 8% of the public.
Wow.
So, Amazon 8% again. Uber 7%. Now that's pretty incredible, isn't it? After their track record.
Yeah.
Google 6%. Well, Lyft, whatever that is, 6%. Snap 4%. Apple 4%. Microsoft 2%.
Wow.
Where are they getting this from? Did Microsoft sponsor this or something?
Maybe, yeah.
Netflix 1% and Tesla 1%.
I'd be lucky if I've been into computers for over 20 years, and I'd say I don't know 2% of people that know anything about Microsoft that actually trust them.
Well, no, anyone who's got a computer wouldn't trust them, would they?
They don't, no.
I mean, if you've got Windows 10, then basically you're under surveillance 24 hours a day, aren't you?
Well, you always have been,
Yeah.
with all the Windows operating systems, really. It's just become more apparent over the years, and they've got more ways of gathering it. But since we was given what we call the operating system, there's always been holes in it. It came from the military, it came from DARPA, and if they would never have wanted us to have had something that they couldn't get into. Even the early day computers with the Pentium chips and all that, the clues in the name with Intel, and the Americans go on about people interfering with their elections and all the rest of it, but via Microsoft and IBM and others, they were selling completely backdoored systems to the Russians and the Chinese and whoever else by them for donkey's years. In the end, they had to start writing their own stuff to get rid of it. This is truly unbelievable hypocrisy.
Oh yeah, it's the same with Huawei. They were going to be kind of cut out of the 5G deal, but it's too late and they're too far in, so they're going to let them be in there. I mean, the whole thing's a bit of a joke, really. But when it comes down to it, if we think about it sensibly, all this data can be collected, and as we know, most of it, on the surface at least, is just for advertising purposes. That's where most of it goes. It goes to things that pop up on your screen, really. That's the front end of it. The back end are obviously more sinister, and we've got into that. But when you think about it, it's only as good as the intelligence they've got. And the intelligence that runs this stuff is people. Often people who are probably not really paying attention. And we've seen this really with stuff that's not even as technological. You know, look how many mistakes are made all the time. And in a way, does any of this matter? Because if the police or the state want to stitch you up, then they will do. We've covered this in great detail. I mean, it's incredible, actually, that the amount of convictions that have been overturned, even after such a long time. And this is one of the things that we've covered this year. We're doing a bit of review of this year, our takedown of Crime Stoppers. I mean, that was a monumental thing to happen, and it all happened behind the scenes after what happened. And you can, I won't go into the story because most of our listeners know about it, but it's absolutely incredible if you look at our Crime Stoppers takedown on the front page of Windows on the World. But they've got Crime Stoppers now. We're offering £50,000. I think it was £10,000 originally by Lord Ashcroft to try and find out who was actually flying this drone. But with the sort of track records that these people and these organisations have, then the possibilities for endless for actually finding someone who's done something who actually hasn't. But let's move on swiftly, because we're going to do 2 hours tonight, so we're going to do 2 consecutive shows. So this show, we'll have another show that follows it, and we're going to be speaking with Piers Corbyn in part 2 of this show. But this is another interesting and very depressing story. PayPal bans BitChute. Now, PayPal have been cutting people off they don't like. Now, wait a minute. PayPal is just for business transactions, and that's all they handle. But now they are politically orientated, as all of this stuff is. It always goes into one book, and what we have is just a corridor of opinion that you're not allowed to be outside of. And it says PayPal has banned BitChute, YouTube's main free speech orientated competitor. Of course, we go out on BitChute. When we go out on Spreaker, we go to BitChute, we go to SoundCloud, and we go to YouTube, and we also go to Facebook and Twitter. But obviously the storage of this stuff on YouTube and BitChute especially is pretty important, because BitChute's meant to be up and coming, and they've now banned it. PayPal have banned BitChute, which is really, really out of order, I think. According to BitChute's statement, the ban appears to be permanent and final, and the only thing provided by the online payment giant in way of a reason is a mention of its acceptable use policy, and there "we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone for any reason" clause. Now, this is quite incredible. The move is a powerful blow against the rapidly ascending video platform, as PayPal subscription payments from supporters had been its main source of revenue. It is our belief, they said, that this is our stand against the current trend in censorship that has resulted in this action. The statement adds, BitChute is pro-free expression, which is a universal human right. Furthermore, censorship and deplatforming are poor ways to tackle societal problems, as they merely create echo chambers that can lead to bigger problems in the long run. Well, you can't really say fairer than that, can you? The online money processing giant is systematically and severely sabotaging businesses, platforms, and people deemed inconvenient to the left. Well, let's not use the left and right. Let's just use the accepted opinion of the new order of the world, which is basically this communist communitarian world, the brave new world, where nothing can be said that's outside the acceptable paradigm, which is actually subversion. It's basically, we're talking about ideological subversion here. So anything outside ideological subversion has to be shut down. So, people deemed inconvenience to the left generally, it says here, and a small circle of established social media giants specifically. Take the case of Twitter's chief microblogging rival, where a mass shooter with a Gab account was used as a pretext for the ban. Now, that's absolutely ridiculous, as we know, but also, when we get these events, they can always tie people to them. That's why it's so simple. This works so simply, because you can tie somebody to anything. And it's happened even to Windows on the World. They try and constantly, people who try and have a go at us, which they never really get anywhere, because if you look at our stuff, it's always pretty balanced. So we don't start ranting about people or making libelous statements. We never do that. But when these attacks have happened, especially to myself and Piers Corbett, because Piers comes on the show quite a lot, obviously let's call it the extreme left, or the Blairites, or whatever you want to call them. They're constantly attacking Corbyn. So anyone associated with Corbyn, which would be twice removed me, because obviously I'm working with his brother Piers, then they're trying to find all this stuff about us that we've said on Facebook from the last 10 years. And I think they came up with a couple of quotes which obviously weren't libelous, so they gave up. But we had an article written about us. I won't even say what site it was on. I don't think it's even present on the internet. It's got such low views. But this is the incredible thing about it all, that anyone can be associated with anything. And let's look at the case of Thomas Mayer. He was alleged to have killed Joe Cox, and all of this far-right stuff was found in his house. It's like a shopping list of what the fake controlled news media would call extreme right. And of course, according to his family and people who knew him, he didn't even know about stuff like that. It wasn't even in his vocabulary. So anyone can be accused of anything, and anything can be made to stick. And this is what the press does all the time. But when you've got the press working with organisations like Crime Stoppers, and of course the data mapping company, ESRI, who Crime Stoppers have conveniently taken off as one of their partners, because they were actually down as one of their partners. That's now disappeared completely. ESRI, the data mapping company, who can actually data map things in real time and basically control the narrative of what's happening through the algorithms of social media. The sort of thing we've been talking about throughout the show. So basically, we've got here The possibilities are endless, and it doesn't really matter what you actually say and what you actually do if the powers that be, or shouldn't be, want to do something. They will attach anything to you that they want to. So in a way, does it make any difference? Tony, what do you think of that? Have you got any ideas? Because it's just, to me, none of this surveillance stuff really matters, because the state will do whatever it wants, and often it doesn't work. But the problem is, obviously, people get stitched up for things. But with this social media stuff, I think that it's so prevalent and it's so in the face of the public that they probably, in my view, are getting a bit fed up with it anyway. Don't you think so?
Yeah, they are, and so they should be as well. I mean, there's been so many cases now in the mainstream about what's going on that everyone knows someone who's been blocked, banned, ghostwritten or whatever. Then I would say many businesses are still using it, and they're starting to struggle as well, because it's not going quite as well with the marketing, the paid advertising, because, you know, even if you're on there, you've got a big listenership and that, if you want to do targeted marketing and advertising on there, you do have to pay quite a considerable amount of money to them. People are finding that less and less effective, so I find that encouraging, but it is still disencouraging, because I've been telling people for, I don't know, a good 15 years about all of this, since the start of MSN and that, where this is all heading and that. But the younger generations seem to have embraced it big time, got lost into it. But I do see encouraging signs in the generation behind that they're not wanting this controlling their lives and that. They're kind of waking up to a bit of how they've been robbed and denied proper futures, homes, and all the basic things that you think you might get in a decent, pretty well off country. And I think they're seeing the tools that are being used against them. I hope so anyway. But
yeah, in the post-truth world, I mean, this is the thing. You've got, everything looks artificially better. The whole idea of the Agenda 2030 policies and the smart cities and all the rest of it, and walkable cities and all the stuff that we've covered, where obviously we're going to be dependent hugely on public transport, locked into very small areas and into tiny little apartments which people can't afford. I mean, I was going through Bow the other day, I think I mentioned this the other week, and you've got these flats that overlook the A102, basically going towards the Blackwall Tunnel, which was a horrible area to live, and it still is, but it's now got the density of building there. I've never seen anything like it. And I just drove past, and it made me giggle a little bit when I saw that apartments were going to be, 1 to 2 bedroom apartments were going to be available in one of these surveilled awful tower blocks overlooking the pollution highway for only £580,000, just starting at £580,000. So that sort of, you know, gets into your point there, that I don't understand how this fake economy works anymore. Well, it doesn't work really. It works as a way of disguising what's really going on. And of course, when everything is controlled in that manner, and the mainstream news will not talk about things like Agenda 2030 and smart cities and what it really means, then the only place you can go is the alternative media. But if people are finding out about it through their own sources, I mean, the thing is, I suppose it is quite encouraging in a way when you talk to people, because when we say the public, I mean, you don't realise that, you know, it's a very broad spectrum, and just because I think that a very good example of this is the so-called north-south divide, where you'll get this sort of Guardian reading, kind of latte drinking, fake news people who lap up everything in the southeast, because they're kind of much more susceptible and much more entitled in their worldview. And once you get outside of London, things change quite a lot. And I think that the London-centric media, they don't really take that into account, do they?
They don't.
Not at all. I mean, I've noticed that with our talks up and down the country, you know, that the people, once you get out of the sort of metropolis, there is a definite different thing. There's not that consensus opinion going on, which is basically overridden. I mean, the media really do kind of influence especially London-based media. Obviously that's a huge influence, and it's sort of, it's not really representative. So that's quite interesting, because we have listeners from all over the world, and we get sent in all sorts of information. That's the great thing about having a media platform like this, is that the amount of interest that we get and the information that comes back is pretty phenomenal, really, because it does back up what we're saying, which is great, but it's also not an echo chamber, because we are actually getting a very broad section of people. And what the media tends to do, especially sort of BBC, is they actually restrict their output so much that they're isolating more and more people, but basically then they're isolating their own audience, which can only be a good thing. However, let's talk just briefly about the Soros shadow government. It says here, Soros drops 1.35 million on non-partisan, in inverted commas, watchdog group hitting Trump with lawsuits. A government watchdog group claiming to be non-partisan while sharing employees with democratic activist group Media Matters accepted 1.35 million from billionaire George Soros. The group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, isn't that a little bit ironic? As it President Trump and other prominent Republicans with high-profile lawsuits, while its members appear regularly on television to attack members of the administration. It was founded by Norman Elson, a law school classmate of former President Obama, who became Obama's ambassador to the Czech Republic, right? And longtime Democrat operative Melanie Sloan. Crew accepted donations from two Soros groups, 1.25 million from the Foundation to Promote Open Society. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I love his sense of irony, old George.
You made it up. All of that.
It's not fake news, Tony. It's from the fake news media. And 100,000 from the Open Society Policy Centre, according to the Washington Free Beacon. So this is incredible stuff, right? And then you've got this story which actually caps it all off. Soros as the Financial Times Person of the Year. See, in business, It doesn't really matter, right? The Financial Times has selected liberal activist, they call him a liberal, right? George Soros, as its Person of the Year in 2018, citing the prominent billionaire as a standard bearer of liberal democracy and open society, with no sense of irony, right? It's not a joke. The Financial Times choice of Person of the Year is usually a reflection of their achievements. The London-based newspaper's editorial board wrote of their choice. In the case of Mr. Soros this year, his selection is also about the values he represents. So that tells you an awful lot about the Financial Times and what the City of London call good business practice.
Yeah, to me, and I better get a disclaimer here to Mark and Windows on the World, because he's got no idea what I'm going to say and he might not agree with it. I think I'll be alright legally, but to me, George Soros is a terrorist. If there is such a thing as a terrorist, then that is what that man is. And there has been a campaign out there to have him arrested as a terrorist for some time, because the things that he does are clear. If you follow the money and follow the records and that, this man has undermined so many different countries, so many aspects of different cultures, in so many ways for so many years that I can't find another word for him myself. Sorry about that if that upsets.
Well, actually, Tony, I think you're way off the mark there, and I'm going to tell you why. It says here, I'm going to quote from this article, Tony, and tell me if you don't agree with it. For more than 3 decades, Mr. Soros has used philanthropy to battle against authoritarianism, racism and intolerance. Well, what's wrong with that, Tony? I mean, come on.
Well, it sounds like the BBC Media Action Trust, doesn't it?
Through his long commitment to openness, media freedom and human rights, he has attracted the wrath of authoritarian regimes. A bit like you, Tony.
Whoa.
You've been very authoritarian. And increasingly the national populists who continue to gain ground, particularly in Europe. Now, it is incredible, and you are right. Under the definition of the Terrorist Act, then groups funded by Open Society could be classed as terrorist organisations, because that's by definition what they are. Read the definition of terrorism in the Terrorist Act, and you will find that it does concur with that. So I was only being ironic, Tony. I hope you didn't think I was being serious there.
I was getting ready to run.
Well, we're going to be getting ready to run, which was a great segue there. You know, well, Merry Xbox and a hoppy nude beer to all of our listener out there, and we're going to be back in approximately 15 minutes at 1:15, and our next show will feature Piers Corbyn, and that will be in a linear timeline on our YouTube, BitChute, SoundCloud and Spreaker. Go to Spreaker, subscribe to us on Spreaker, because we are getting much more traffic on Spreaker now than we are on YouTube, which is great. See you in a couple of minutes or next year. Good night from me, and it's good night from
Cheers, everyone.
Tony. See you in a bit.